every appointed senator will have to respect the will of the people if we want to remain to maintain any sense of legitimacy as a parliamentary body.
There would be riots on the street if this Senate will try to block common sense conservative policy.
CBC is reporting that Justin Trudeau has decided to fill 10 vacant senator positions prior to his departure on March 9th. Can he do this? Is he allowed to do this? And what's the impact of him doing this?
Let's take a look. January 27th, so this was yesterday, folks. Trudeau to fill Senate vacancies before retiring. Source: government preparing to fill all 10 vacant seats in the coming weeks.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is planning a final wave of appointments to fill the 10 vacancies in the Senate before he retires in March, Radio Canada has learned. The move would allow him to leave a mark on Parliament for years to come, as these unelected legislators will be able to sit until the age of 75. A source familiar with the matter says that the selection process for the future senators is already underway and should be completed before his departure. After proroguing Parliament earlier this month, Trudeau announced that he will leave power after the Liberal Party chooses a new leader on March 9th. In a written response, the Prime Minister's office confirmed that the Advisory Board for Senate Appointments is at work to propose candidates for all vacancies. Quote, "Prorogation did not affect the ability of the Governor-General to make appointments to the Senate based on the advice of the Prime Minister," end quote, said PMO spokesman Simon Lafortune. Quote, "The Prime Minister takes his responsibility to appoint senators seriously and will do so as long as he remains in office," end quote. There are currently 12 senators affiliated with the Conservative Party in the 105-seat chamber. Quote, "For someone who advocated an independent Senate, Trudeau will have ended up filling the Senate with a large majority of Liberals or people who support his policies," end quote, said Conservative Senator Claude Carignan. The chart on the page shows us that there are 3 Senate vacancies in Ontario, 2 in British Columbia, 2 in Quebec, 1 in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Saskatchewan each. Carignan said that Trudeau, quote, "has the power to appoint senators, but after resigning, I don't think he has the legitimacy to do so," end quote. There were 22 vacancies in the Senate when Trudeau took power in 2015. So far, he has appointed 90 senators in total. Due to retirements, there will be 10 positions to fill as of February the 2nd.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Number one, can he do this? Like, is he able to?
Yes, he's able to do it. But I think the real question is, should he do it?
Well, and there's been a little bit of discussion online about, well, the Parliament is prorogued, he can't do this. So yes, he can. Why can he do this? Because this is typically done via an order in council, and that is made to the Governor General, and then the Governor General essentially signs it and says, yes, this is happening. So,
well, this is done by the executive branch of the government. The only branch that's currently prorogued is the legislative branch. So, of course, the executive branch is still functioning. They are permitted to still do things like appoint senators.
Now, the other thing to consider here is Trudeau doing something that is unprecedented? And the answer is no. What do we mean by that? Well, what we're talking about here is a prime minister that is filling Senate vacancies in their last months in office. So who else did this? Well, Jean Chrétien did this knowing that he was going to be essentially turning over the Liberal Party. He did this in his final months. Brian Mulroney did this. Pierre Elliott Trudeau did this. St. Laurent did this. And John Diefenbaker did this. And he did this after he lost the election, might I add. So,
which was probably the most egregious of the ones we've listed. And I think this is why people are calling foul on Trudeau doing this, because, I mean, he hasn't lost the election yet, but he's resigned as prime minister. He said, my term is coming to an end. My mandate is coming to an end. But I'm still going to put senators in the Senate.
Right. So, there's a good argument to say, does he have a mandate to do this? No, he does not, because he has essentially resigned from the mandate, and we're about to go to an election. And two, does he have the legitimacy to do this? It depends on how you argue that, objectively speaking. Technically he has quote unquote legitimacy from the people voting in his party in the last election, but he has called that legitimacy into question by resigning. So therefore, the expectation would be from most politicians that he would essentially act as a caretaker until the government transitions into a new mandate, whoever gets elected. Now, the other bigger picture question, and this makes these appointments a little bit more irrelevant, not completely, but a little bit more, is Trudeau stacking the Senate? You heard the Conservative senator, and they're saying, well, he was advocating for an independent Senate, and he's just putting, partisan people in. Well, understand that every Conservative government before this has also put in Conservative senators. And so they should. So they should, because they appoint senators that align with their political view, because there is also a system of back and forth in the Senate of government and opposition. Now, it's right to call it Justin Trudeau because he has been completely hypocritical on this. But in the grand scheme, what are these 10 senators going to be doing in terms of the effect that they have? Well, as the article said, there's 105 total seats in the Senate. 12 of these senators are aligned with the Conservatives. So already you have 93 seats? 93 seats left, and then 10 of those are vacant, so you have 83 seats left that are essentially Trudeau or Chrétien appointees. So the Senate is already stacked at this point. The question is what's going to happen after the Conservatives assumably win the election and win a large majority? Is this going to cause problems in the Senate? A lot of people are suggesting that they're going to block everything. The Conservatives will not be able to get anything done. Well, the good news is that months ago, we actually sat down with two different senators. Senator Don Plett, who is the Conservative caucus leader in the Senate. So he's the equivalent of Pierre in the House, but Senator Plett is the head of the Conservative caucus in the Senate. And we also met with Senator Leo Housakos, has been in the Senate for a while. Very nice man, very knowledgeable man. Let's take a look at a couple of clips from those interviews that we did and see what they had to say about this.
Now, one of the things that we talked about off camera right before was the Salsbury Convention.
Yes.
And for those that don't know, so the Salsbury Convention essentially says that what the Senate is supposed to do is to respect the will of the people as a result of the platform that the party that's taking power essentially ran on. So if they ran on abolishing the carbon tax, then the Senate doesn't have any justification to block said bill. But you told me something interesting in terms of the Salsbury Convention versus the constitutional rights of the Senate.
Yeah, very few people know this, but when the Parliament of Canada was constituted, the Senate of Canada was given the exact same rights and privileges as the House of Commons, which gives an enormous amount of influence to senators and the Senate. And because we're an appointed body, it also, I think, puts an enormous amount of responsibility on our shoulders. Section 18 of the Constitution has created, it gives the powers to the Senate the exact same powers that the House of Commons in Westminster has, which is the exact same section which gives the rights and privileges to our House of Commons. But the exception is, through the years, through precedence and tradition, first of all, we recognize that we can never defeat money bills. The Senate can never also put forward money bills where any piece of legislation requires funds, for example. Mm-hmm. And that, again, respects the will of the people. no taxation without representation, which is at the core of our democratic system. The debate goes on, when do we exercise that power? And there have been instances where the Senate has defeated government legislation. But like I said, it was very few. You had to be certain that when you do that, that you have the overwhelming will of the public behind you as an institution. Every appointed senator will have to respect the will of the people if we want to remain, to maintain any sense of legitimacy as a parliamentary body.
So that was just part of our interview with Senator Husako. So we will put a link to the full video in the description. Make sure you check it out, because that was the overarching theme of our discussion with him, was what happens with this Senate that's full of Liberal Senate appointees.
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons we went to Ottawa, was to actually meet with Senator Husakos during that trip. Now, we also took a separate trip to sit down with Senator Don Plett. Many of you may be familiar with his very poignant speeches in the Senate. I think probably one of the most famous is when he goes on his lecture to the government senators about the different scandals over the course of Justin Trudeau's career as the Prime Minister of Canada. But we touched on this as well because we wanted to get his take.
So I imagine strategically the last thing the Liberals would want is even more vitriol directed their way by a Liberal Senate blocking Conservative bills. So what's your take on that?
Without doubt, clearly the Conservative Party's biggest asset right now is Pierre Poilievre. Yes. I would suggest their biggest asset right now is Justin Trudeau. People are tired of Justin Trudeau. They are tired of his ideological woke agenda, which is exactly what he has, which I spoke about at length last night. And so people are tired of that. Our lot here in life has not improved in the last 9 years. It has gone down. Our take-home pay, every Canadian's take-home pay has gone down. The average rent now is somewhere around $2,200 a month for somebody to rent a place to live. Houses are $1 million. People can't afford. People are living in their parents' basements. We have lineups at food banks like I've never seen. I'm from the city of Steinbeck. It's a small, prosperous city, and we have lineups there at our food banks that are a block and a half long. It is painful to see, and that has all been under Justin Trudeau's watch. And so without question, I think the people that have waited for a good, common-sense Conservative government are going to be incensed if they see an unelected Senate trying to block what a common-sense Conservative Prime Minister under Pierre Poilievre will bring. I've only got a half a year left before my magic age, but I will be watching, and I suspect that there would be riots on the street if this Senate will try to block common-sense Conservative policies.
And I imagine calls to abolish the Senate as well. So,
without question, that call to abolish the Senate would come out very, very quickly. And I know that our leader and future Prime Minister has always been a supporter of our Senate, and he will continue, and he will try to work with the Senate. But without question, if the Senate doesn't want to work with him, that will be the people will not take kindly to that.
So there we have it. I think the point that both senators are making is that the Senate is supposed to help carry out the will of the people, which is the legislation of the House of Commons, because the House of Commons is elected by the people. The Senate's job is not to stand in the way of the will of the people.
Well, and if you also extrapolate what they're saying, most of the senators understand that if they want to remain an unelected Senate, if they want to remain in these very secure jobs,
Prestigious jobs.
because as a senator, once you're appointed, you are there until the age of 75, right? And there's ways to remove senators, but it's not straightforward.
And it really doesn't happen. Aside from them committing a crime, it really does not happen. The
Right.
only way out is to hit that age of 75, to pass away while you're in office, or to retire voluntarily.
Now, to abolish the Senate, that's a huge deal. That's a almost referendum wide type of approach that you would need in Canada. You need, I believe it was 10 of the 10 provinces to agree. A lot of things have to happen. It's a bit easier to change it to an elected Senate, which I know a lot of Canadians are in favor of, but
Still difficult, don't get us wrong.
yeah, but coming back to it, the senators understand that they need to be careful here. And here's the other point, right? Here's the other point. And this is the point I made actually in that interview with Senator Don Plett, is with a new leader taking over of the Liberals, the last thing that the Liberal Party wants, especially when they're trying to regain legitimacy, is the Senate actually sabotaging them. Because if the Senate, all they're doing is blocking conservative legislation, the Liberal Party of Canada is just going to lose more and more and more support, not gain it.
Yeah, look at all these Liberal appointed senators that are blocking legislation from the House of Commons, the House of Commons being elected by Canadian people.
Right.
Now, I think the real outrage here is not that the Senate is stacked, because the reality is that the Senate has been stacked for some time. The vast majority of those appointees are now Trudeau appointees, because Trudeau has been in office for almost 10 years. The real outrage here is, does Trudeau have the authority? Does he have the right to appoint 10 more senators after he's already tendered his resignation? That's the question. And that's the thing that Canadians should be outraged about.
Well, and Canadians that are still wondering whether or not they want to vote Liberal or not, and Canadians that have registered for the Liberal Party, you should be talking to those candidates. You should be sending them emails. You should be sending them letters and saying, why aren't you speaking up against what Justin Trudeau is doing? Because it doesn't make your party look very good. It actually makes your party look even more corrupt, if possible, than it already does. So this is not a good look going into a general election for a prime minister that has stated he's not running, has stated that he's resigning as of March 9th, and yet he's taking the opportunity to fill 10 seats with his chosen senators. And I would levy the same criticism that John Diefenbaker, same thing.
Yeah, his was almost worse, dare I say it, because he knew he lost the election and he installed some senators anyways. Like, that was completely out of spite.
So I equate these. It's a dirty move by Justin Trudeau. He doesn't have the mandate, I would argue, and I would argue with a lot of people out there, he doesn't have the legitimacy. But here's the good news, folks. We always end on good news.
Or we try anyway.
As soon as Pierre Poilievre takes over, when a seat opens up in the Senate, then he will have the ability to appoint senators. And by the time he's done his first term, over a third of the Senate will then be conservative. And by the time he's done his second term, he will have the majority of the Senate as conservative senators.
Well, and this is common practice in our House of Commons / Senate committees. Like, because the Senate stays in their seats until the age of 75, at the beginning of a new government's term, it's going to be largely populated by people who represent the old government. But as that goes on, as time goes on, as the new government gets its second term, maybe even a third term, the Senate then becomes majority appointees by that government.
So example, if you look here, every single line in here, say for the top two, will end up turning blue. When Pierre Poilievre is done his first term of government. And that's because if you see under the date of retirement, you see that all of these people are retiring essentially before or shortly before the next election. So this is just a sample of all of the senators that currently serve in the Senate, and you can look them up on the Senate website. That link is also in the description. You can see where they are, where they're from, and what their party affiliation is.
Now, you might be sitting here saying, this is upsetting to me, and it should be. What can I do about this? This is especially important if you currently have a Liberal MP. You can write to them and let them know, this is inappropriate. I don't believe that you guys should be appointing senators while you're on your way out after Trudeau has already resigned. And you can let them know your thoughts on that. Again, when you're writing the MPs, please be civil with them. No name calling, no cursing, no threats. But if they get enough letters from concerned Canadians that are saying, we don't accept this, this is not right, it'll make them think twice.
Now, the last thing that we want to address is the polls. So there's been, I would say, one rogue polling agencies out there, ECOS, and their recent polling numbers have been, well, let's just say they've been
very
skewed.
different from everybody else's.
So how different, you may ask? Well, let's take a look. So here are the latest polls over the last week that have come in. Now, two of them have been from ECOS. The first one, they had the Liberal Party of Canada all the way up to 31.7% of the popular vote, with only roughly a 7-point gap between them and the Conservatives. And then 2 days later, they had another one showing only a 4-point gap, which is ridiculous, folks. It's absolutely ridiculous, especially when you then compare it to Nanos Research. They still have the Conservatives at 42.
It's like almost a 17.1 point gap.
Right. And then Abacus Data at a 21-point gap. And the difference between Abacus and Nanos, that's normal between those two polling agencies.
Well, especially because Nanos tends to lean a little bit in favor of the Liberals, and Abacus is traditionally a little bit in favor of the Conservatives. Now, as we've warned, you will see that gap narrow. The Conservatives will not go into the election with a 47-point lead, which we had seen previously, or
Well, a
47
21-point lead.
Yeah, 47% of the popular vote. That's unheard of. That gap will narrow, but we are confident that the Conservatives will be getting a majority. It's just a matter of how much. Is it going to be a super majority, or is it just going to be a regular majority? And I think what's going to make the difference in that is that we all get out, we all go volunteer with our electoral district associations, door knock, put signs in the ground, whatever it happens to be that they need from us, and remind our friends and family members when the day comes, let's get out and vote.
And the last thing that we'll say is that the whole idea of the Senate and these additional senators being put in, and the concern that has been brought up of what if they block legislation. This is why it's very important that Canadians continue to pay attention, continue to be engaged with government, understanding how it works, and watching these bills navigate from the House to the Senate and then royal assent. Why is that? Because Canadians need to ensure that not only the House of Commons and those elected politicians are doing their jobs, that these unelected senators are also doing their jobs. And if they are not respecting the mandate that the government was elected with, which is the mandate that is expected that they carry on through the Senate, then the Senate is no longer respecting the will of the people. And at that point, Canadians need to let the entire country know that that will not be tolerated.